Bona tarda a tothom. Ai, em sembla que necessitarem uns auriculars per la Carrie, si ens ho porteu. Bona tarda. És un goix veure aquí a l'Auditori Meyer tan ple. Jo sóc l'Elvira Llanganiosa, directora del MACBA, i també comissària juntament amb el Raül Muñoz de la Vega dels 3 projectes que es presenten a Mafre, Fotocoletània, a Mafre KBR, Fotocoletània i aquí al MACBA, que fan un recorregut per l'obra de Carrie Mae Weems. Això que veieu i que d'alguna manera donava la benvinguda, Make Someone Happy, és una de les propostes de les que parlarem avui també, però volia saber quants de vosaltres heu anat a veure la peça que hi ha a la capella? Well, yes. Very good. So, Carrie, these are all the people that have seen already Lincoln, Lonnie, and me. And I was saying just thank you very much for you to be here, and thank you also to Sally. It's a great pleasure to stay. Yes, in case somebody. I'm gonna continue in English if you don't mind. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Carrie, for being here. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for everybody that is joining. It was very important for us to complement what we have seen in the 3 institutions that host your work these days, MACBA, Fotocoletània, and Mafre KBR. Because in a way it gives us an introduction to your practice, but also we didn't have the chances for Fotocoletània to bring films into the show. No? And of course, I'm saying this while we have at MACBA this beautiful installation at La Capella. And we'd love for us to start talking a little bit about both of you, because we have Sally here, who is fabulous filmmaker as well. Can I say that?
Your perception. It's yours.
And we thought that we will have a conversation throughout the presentation of some of Carrie's movies, some of Carrie's films, but also to take that as a quote to talk about some of the elements that you consider through your practice, no? Besides some of the issues, also the fact that you want to make someone happy, no? That is and I don't know if you want to say a couple of things, just very briefly, the 2 of you, as an introduction, something of who you are, and then we launch the first set of movies.
About me. So thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be in between these 2 incredible women and really admire of their work. What about me? I feel I'm constantly researching new shapes, new ways, and the heart of everything that I want to do. So I try not to classify myself in windows, right? So every time I hear a filmmaker, I'm like, yeah, maybe some days I did some films. Yeah, right. Okay. You know, just as a reminder of those things are there. And actually it's really beautiful, because sometimes I feel that I go so fast in trying new things that I forget what brought me there. No, what are the practices that actually, and the experiences that push me from one experience to the other. So I am here as someone who's spent a lot of time looking at pictures, maybe a lot of time trying to figure out how to communicate certain things in a different way, or make someone feel something through images and through a visual experience or the visual experience. And that is more or less the frame my mind is understanding also this presence here. So thank you so much for having me.
So good evening, and thank you all. It's my test. And thank you all for coming, and of course, Vera, for inviting me and bringing me back here to this really extraordinary city. It's so beautiful. I mean, it's just so beautiful, and the food is so good. My pants are getting tighter and tighter daily, and so I have to really watch it. I've been working around film since the very beginning, I've been making these like little tiny, little discrete projects. And I've always, and I really love film, even though I spend the vast majority of my time really thinking about photographs, how to make photographs, how to build installations that incorporate photographs, and how to sustain narratives, long narratives over not only one project, but a group of projects. Because I think that, in every case, almost without fail, the beginning of a project is always rooted in the project that came before. There's always an echo. There's always something that didn't quite get made or introduced deeply in that previous project that comes back around. Ideas and thoughts and feelings. And somehow, I've always thought that essentially throughout the course of one's life, that we're all working on a single project. We're just working on one thing. And every project, every completed and or incomplete project really sort of speaks to the thing that is most meaningful, most important to you, and how to express it now. It's like trying to read, War and Peace when you're 13, and you don't understand anything, and then you read it when you're 20, and you understand a little bit more, and then you read it when you're 30, and then you realize that you didn't understand anything at all when you were 10. And I think that the same thing is actually true of your own practice, and that the work is actually telling you what it is, and the work is actually showing you what you care about, right? And that it becomes revealing. And so these narratives, these stories, these things that I'm concerned with, whether they are in photographs or in film, which allows me to speak differently, allows me to enter. In fact, I made a project called When and Where I Enter. From what viewpoint, from what perspective now do I grapple with some other element, some piece of the narrative, of the story that I'm trying to get to.
And in this sense of image making, I was thinking very deeply, no? And so how you have engaged with the idea of the now, but also with the idea of the unanswered, no? Like the next project is a thing that needs to get an answer somehow, or perhaps, like I think is in your case, Carrie, provide even more questions than the one before. No? I think that this search of image making is very much present in both your, let's say, your take on film. But let's start with some images, right? Let's start with some movies, and we see you in a bit.
So what are we going to see first? I think we're going to look at People of a Darker Hue.
Yes.
Yeah?
People of the Darker Hue and Baptism. One from 2016 and the second one from 2020. Related but at different moments. There is something also about your practice that I found very, which has to do with what you're saying, no? That express it now. But in your case, I feel that the actuality of some works that were made like 40 years ago is incredible. And perhaps it's because of the passion, of the longing that it expressed, right? Of the necessity for it to generate something other than the feeling set of the set of photographies, which I think is very poignant. So can I ask our colleagues to launch the movies right away? Thank you. Do you want to say what you were saying before about the...
Yeah, until they work out the difficulties. Besides working in video, a little bit in film, but primarily in video, in photography. At a certain point, I started doing and arranging, actually, and producing performances. And I've always worked with musicians and composers, or rather, I should say, often I've worked with museums, with musicians and composers. And then there was a horrible event that took place, the killing of the Emanuel Nine in Charleston, South Carolina. And I decided to build a performance in relationship to those murders that happened there. And People of a Darker Hue was the project that actually came out of that work. And that is also actually going to be linked to a bit to the baptism that I worked on with Carl Hancock Rux. So hopefully they'll be able to work out the technical stuff. But in the meantime, are there other things that you want to talk about?
Yes, of course. There is something about you just mentioned. No, there is a plate in the second room of KBR, where you dedicated to a case study, a HIV case study room, where there is a commemorative plate. Yes. And it's commemorating every man, every black man that reaches 21.
Yes.
There is something that sometimes is a very, I will say, complex, which is to bring beauty, an issue of violence, without deterring it from its factuality. Mm-hmm. And I think if anybody could talk about the exuberance of your practice, in a way, sometimes I think is that, right? That make us cry has to do with the fact that we are engaged in something extremely beautiful when we know it's painfully violent. No, in fact, in that room we can see history of violence. There are moments in Lincoln, Lonnie, and Me where that also is presented, but we are engaged in this phantasmagoric representation of beauty, in a way. No? And I want us to, if you can, to discuss a little bit more about how beauty is sometimes that almost a weapon in a way. No?
You know, I was thinking today that the thing that, most of us get up and we go to a job because it's a job, right? And it pays us a salary. But the artists that I know, including myself, are simply driven, right? There is no guarantee that there's going to be a paycheck at the end of a project. There is no guarantee that there'll be an exhibition. There is no guarantee that anything is going to happen other than you are going to have the possibility of getting all of this onto the surface, right? Onto some kind of surface and out of you, right? That you can look at, the emotional expanse of yourself and the questions that you're raising. And so, I've always thought that, that I'm always dealing, and that we're dealing with the thing that's important, I think, about what artists do is that we're dealing with the deepest emotional part of ourselves and being able to share that with an audience and anybody who cares to look at that. And so in that way, you're always revealing and opening up. And so he's trying to figure this out. Okay, so let me just wrap this up anyway. And so these are, some of it is traumatic. What you're dealing with, what you're negotiating, what I'm trying to get to. What does it mean to really try to understand the complexity of your humanness and all of your ugliness and all of your flaws and all of your shit, right? What does that really mean? You know, like I have to wake up every day and realize how fucked up I really, really am, right? You know, even in the midst of it all, right? That I can't lie to myself, that I know that that's a real part of who I am, that I am complicit in all kinds of ways. And so if you're dealing with the traumatic, right? I'm trying to sort of figure out a way that I can actually have a conversation with my audience around the trauma, right? What allows you to come closer to the work, right? How is the work constructed and how is the work made? How is the work considered? How is the intention delivered that allows us to engage in a back and forth that might be impossible if I'm only dealing with the brutality. And the brutality simply isn't going to get me where I need to go. I have to unpack it in all these other ways to sort of talk about its form, its function, its meaning. And a part of that is sort of discovering for myself the aesthetic qualities that are absolutely essential to the work to be engaged in that dialogue in a more complex way with an artist with an audience that I care about having a conversation with. And they're all, of course, stemming around and functioning around question. But that is really, I think, at the core of it, that, you know, that these are difficult subjects, they're painful, but that's not the only space in which one can function and or live. You have to be able to push out, right? You know, to pin it and then to push from it. And the thing that you're pushing for, the thing that you want more than anything, is some sense of freedom and escape from that thing. So that's the reason that the work looks the way it does.
You hear me now. Let's see those movies. It almost feels like strange to talk straight after this. The poetry is so so poignant, sometimes so hurtful, right? I was thinking in something very specific of both movies, which is, on the one hand, this keep on walking, right? The walk as an action. And I thought a lot about Fanon's interview to, you remember Frantz Fanon's in The Virtue of the Earth, one of the chapters. He's interviewing some of the Argelian soldiers. No? And all the dreams that they had were dreamings of walking, of jumping, of, you know, like getting out of that limitless, no, the limited, space that, you know, the colonization has set them up. And you draw it beautifully, no? And we have seen it in both, no? Things come out to the surface, you know, the inflorescence, no? From the same trunk. I don't know what walking, and we, I love for us to talk a little bit about also the background of this walking, no? But it seems to me that there is something in, we were saying earlier that
it's that movement forward.
Exactly, but also
of movement.
But also the everydayness,
the everydayness.
as almost as a weapon against the spectacle of the trauma.
It's really interesting because, you know, again, as I was saying before, I hope you guys are not falling asleep, that you're not just completely.
Maybe we should have applause
But you know, I mean, these. This compulsion and this desire to really sort of mark the moment of the everyday. People of the Darker Hue, for the most part, was filmed down the street from my apartment in Brooklyn, along Flatbush Avenue, one of the most dynamic streets in the world. I mean, you know, I can go along Flatbush Avenue from the Brooklyn Bridge to the Manhattan Bridge to, you know, to into the western part of the city and encounter every conceivable group. The level of diversity is so massive and so immense and so extraordinary, right? That all I had to do was just walk down the street and point the camera. And And I've done the same thing. And I think these ideas about repetition become important ideas for me. And I go back to the same material over and over. I mine the same material. I don't throw it out because I've used it once. I assume that it has purpose and that it has usefulness. I'm very interested in the economy of means. I'm interested in really sort of shaping, this idea about sort of the compression of space while people are also on the move, I think is also very interesting aesthetically, how it works, right? Because you're really in this very tight space, even as people are moving forward, and you are on them. You are on them, right? And they are aware of you, right? Which is why certain people are making gestures towards the camera. They understand that the camera is there, and sometimes they're performing for the camera, that they're aware of it, which I think is really important. I've always really hated the idea of hiding behind the camera, or hiding the camera so that the audience or that the people actually don't know what's going on, which is why I think, for the most part, I walked away from documentary photography so early on. But this idea, I think, of movement and repetition of form is really important in the work, and I keep coming back to it again. And of course, I'm seeing all kind of problems with it too. It's like, you need to cut that. You need to cut that. So it's not really comfortable for me to be sitting here looking at this work in the dark.
Thank you for doing it and being here with us still. I wanted to connect with something that you said right before we started watching the films, and that they really came into my mind. It was this idea of being confronted with the complexity of our humanness and see that in those images. And I think bringing that to that time, I think it brings on us even more this need to be able to see this complexity in us through the work and in constant reflection, when we live in a time that it seems we need more and more certainty, and we're less and less comfortable with these dialogues and this complexity in us. But I also would like to bring it to the context here in Spain, Barcelona, when we see these works that come from somewhere else, right? And I think in that way in which people of a darker hue start, which is observing and letting people come in and out of that image, allows us as an audience to be, observant, but at the same time, we sort of have an invitation to participate in the way we're looking, because you're living the camera in a way that invites us to make a choice somehow. What are you looking at? Who's passing how? And how am I looking at that? And in that engagement, I feel what happens here a lot with work that comes from abroad is there is a distance. I can look at this with my identity untouched, so I can do it from certain distance and certain, oh, how nice. Whereas if everybody here was looking at these images thinking this is Barcelona, there's a more relatable connection with their own identity of looking at these images, that suddenly the discomfort will light up somehow, and you will have to observe it, or you will have to live with it. How is it for you to bring these works in different parts of the world, or how has been that experience with you?
Well, I don't know what it means to be, in some ways, looking at the work from your perspective. I don't really know exactly what that means. I'm not sure if you feel what I feel or know what I know. I think that, I am deeply humanitarian. So I'm deeply impacted by what happens with people around the world. So it doesn't have to be me or my group. I'm not a groupie in that way. That I'm really very much interested in how does the work reflect your reality and reflect the complexity of your own humanity. And so to that extent, I assume that it makes a relationship with the audience, right? That the audience is connected because they care, because there's something about their humanity that is being touched, their compassion, their understanding, their empathy, their love for the other that is being touched. Though I also understand that we really do deal with material differently. America deals with material very different. You look so familiar. Have we met before? No, we haven't. Anyway, you look very familiar. So, and so there's something that, you know, like I'm very aware of the graphic material around me here in Barcelona in this case, or then I was in London the other day. I was in, right, and the way in which Americans work with material is actually very different, and the materials that we draw from are different. The graphic material, the visual material, and that really interests me. But you know, I've been moving around. I've been moving around for the last couple of weeks. I was in London. I've been here, and I'm thinking about silos, the silos of the world, and the way in which we are siloed. And I'm wondering who is going to help me carry the load. I'm wondering about the compassion of others, about the empathy of others. I was in the bookstore today, you know, looking at globes and maps. In the United States, is a huge continent. It's a large continent. It's very self-protected in a very unique way, right? Here I can be in London or Paris or Barcelona or any number of countries, Switzerland, in an hour, 2, 3, right? 3, 5, 6, 9 hours later in Texas, I would still be in Texas. Right? I would still be in Texas. So these geographies, I think, are really complex, and they inform who we are. They inform how we respond to the world, how we either invite people in or keep people out. But I learned something the other day that only roughly 8% of the US population actually has a passport. So they've never really been anyplace else other than the country. The vast majority of the country has only been in its country. The vast majority of people have actually only been in their state. In fact, the vast majority of people have only been in the city, in the state in which they live, and most of those people have only been in the neighborhoods in which they live, in the state, in the country in which they live. And somehow, within all of that is still the underlying belief that there is a complex humanity that is there, and that is the thing that I am absolutely interested in connecting to. Rosa Luxemburg said, "I am at home in the world where there are clouds and birds and human tears. I refuse to be locked in by borders, locked in by concepts, perceptions that insist on denying my humanity. I refuse it." And so I try to make the work within that spirit. And so how do you see it? Does that make sense to you? Or do you see it differently because of identity? Do you, I mean, for instance, let me just say this, I thought that, in relationship, for instance, to people of a darker hue, which is, making it was very difficult, and dealing with these deaths and these murders and looking at them over and over and over and trying to edit them, the aesthetics of editing, of deciding when to cut, right? When to speak, when to, right? All of those things are very difficult. And my assistant would just run out at the end of the day, just emotionally exhausted. And there were just simply days that she really couldn't work on it, and I couldn't work on it either. It was just sort of too hard. But something sort of extraordinary happened, which brings me back to your question, and perhaps a question for the audience, in this question around empathy and compassion. the murder of George Floyd, brought us to another place, or at least it seemed to, for a moment of time, right? We were all at home. We were all watching television, right, during this lockdown, right? We were focused in a way that we had never been focused before, all around the world. And one day, a young girl is filming on her phone the murder of a man that is in real time, and we see this. And at the end of the day, millions of people around the world walked out of their homes and into the streets protesting and demonstrating. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back, and it all happened like that, right? Something happened, something clicked. How does that then not relate actually to the same thing here in people of a darker hue, right? Right? The only difference was that there was a moment. That there was a moment when the world was watching at a very particular historical moment, when we were all in a certain kind of pain. We were all in a certain kind of isolation, and we all had another level of empathy. And the thing that's really fascinating, and this is even more fascinating, when Obama entered the White House, there was actually a rise in the assassinations and the murders of young black men. There was a rise. That was the reaction to Obama's presidency, that they were killing black men all over the country. Fascinating. But after he left, actually the murder rate went down. So how are we to sort of, again, think about these sort of moments, right? The same thing sort of happened after this wave of empathy and compassion and understanding around George Floyd. In 2021, early 2021, before we left the lockdown, the vast majority of Americans thought that dialogue was crucial. Now, a year later, only about 35% of Americans think that dialogue is critical, right? I mean, I think that these ideas are really interesting, and they, I think, still relate very much to the work, because the work is really about context and about meaning and about all of these issues, right? And that's the reality of what's going on under the surface of the making and the meaning of the work. Yeah.
Are you going to answer the question?
Do you want me to answer the question?
If you can, you don't have to, it's not necessary.
I was asking.
Sure. I mean, I am the kind of person who's constantly, I think what you were talking about, where in our entire career, maybe we were constantly actually talking about the same thing in just in different works. And for me, for my context, the way I was raised and how I view the world, for me, that is identity. I think my mission in this world is to actually question it in every single way that I can do that. Within myself, and with myself first, through the world, but also through my practice and my invitation to others.
Do you mean your identity, your personal identity? Or do you mean identity in another way?
I mean it, yeah, it might be personal, but it might be everything. When I identify with a certain race, what does it mean? When I identify with a certain gender, job, place I was raised, nationality, cultural context, and everything everything, my hand, my eye. What does it mean, really, to feel that I am any of these things? And what I found in this process, which is obviously is a whole lifetime, I imagine, and I hope, of investigation, is what I perceive, and then through the work, what I perceive and what I see and how I feel about most of the things that I see are part of the construct of my identity. I will always see, perceive, and interact with work through what I believe who I am or what I am, right?
True. Yes.
And I think that what we are seeing more and more, for me, in this reaction that only 35% now think there needs to be a conversation is a need so strong to defend a certain identity that now is being put at the edge of the possibility of existing, that nothing that could question that can exist around me, right? Yes. So dialogue is questioning, right? It's the possibility of questioning. That's right. That's right. So I think through work, what I work a lot through the emotional, or I've done, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I've done in the sense that, I never know. But in the sense that I've tried to find images that will connect in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to totally contradict myself, because then I go with, I have a short film score, I'm Buried, and it's very emotional. And it was very emotional for me to make it. But then I will see these emotional responses everywhere, despite the identity you're using to watch that work, right?
That's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it.
Answer God. You got the answer.
I mean, that's so great. I think that's really the thing, right? You know, that if you construct work in a certain kind of way, that it will connect. For instance, the Kitchen Table series, it's playing, that's on view at Fotocolectania. No matter where I've shown it in the world, the response is very much the same. The essential response is very much the same, because essentially we're pretty much the same, right? I think probably fear keeps us more at odds than anything, and fear can certainly bend and blind your perceptions and perceptives of others, for sure. Yeah.
No, and I was thinking that both of you are claiming for this humanitarian, no, the humanness, the let's say also a sense of coevalness. I was thinking, right, like coevalness as a way of getting together. No, somebody was asking me the other day, what is contemporaneity? No, and I was saying there is the awareness of being in the world here and now, and that here and now that connects you with people everywhere. No, those people that, as you said earlier, respond to the world essentially in a certain way. No?
But now I'm like getting really old, and so the thing that's really it's when you're younger, you really don't want to be objectified, but when you get to be about 70, you're like hoping that you will be objectified. You're hoping that somebody is going to be looking at your ass, right? So now I can just like float down the street. I can basically do just about anything. Nobody's looking, right? And so all my theories have gone out the window, And but it's really fascinating about these ideas about who's looking, at you and how they're looking at you, and it really is true, right? That age and orientation and all of this has so much to do with how you are also viewed, right? And so there are all these, again, these like sort of silos and these sort of boxes that we can fall into, that we're put in, that really do have an impact on how we are able to work. How we're able to work in the world. And so, if the thing that sort of most concerns me. The thing that most concerns me is how we're actually able to work in the world based on who we are and what we look like, and how the work will be understood and or misunderstood, right? The value of the work of women, for the most part, outside the home is still fairly undervalued, right? Whether you are white or black or right, or whatever your nationality is, right? If you are a woman, as we know, with these amazing women demonstrating right now in Iran, right? These young women in the United States who are rallying around Roe v. Wade. I mean, the impacts of this is enormous, right? The sort of subjugation of women, and the impact of that subjugation on men, right? How we function then, I think, is really, really key to much of this work. How do we function? What is perception? How does it bend us? How does it attempt to destroy us and or break us? And what are the avenues through which we might disrupt it? And what are then the questions, the essential questions then that we might ask that may give us a push in a direction that is more progressive, right? But how we work, I think, is really important. And how you work in this institution, I think, is very important. That you are a woman and a Black woman and an African woman running this institution here in Barcelona, I think, is key. How you will be looked at, how you will be judged, how you will be questioned and or not engaged is a real and serious thing. And not to recognize it and not to talk about it, I think, is problematic. And yet, we know, and the thing that I'm always concerned with is how do I push around it? What are the rivers and the streams that I can use in order to continue the work and have the work engaged in a serious way and dealt with in a serious way? But I know that for the most part, my work remains undervalued, right? Undervalued. And I use the gauge of the marketplace to tell me that. And it's really fascinating. I mean, it's bigger than me, but I'm really interested in how it works and then what it looks like.
We're going to take that perception of women into the next two films that we're going to see. I Look at Women, produced in 2015, and Afro Chick, two different takes around womanhood that would like us to explore in depth. Afro Chick 2009. So let's go ahead with those, and we'll see you in a minute. Well,
It is so silly. It's like so, right?
there is something very beautiful that says in I Look at Woman, where it says a story that had but very little space for her. No? And it seems to me that if before we were seeing the work as a way of bearing witness, no? of certain trauma, as a word of the awakening of aspect of that emancipation of selfhood, coming out for air. No? Here we have
Sanctified lady.
and the groovy, but also the enunciation, right? You were talking just before we went to the movies. You were talking about the undervalue of the work of women, and here you both are enunciating. Every work is an act of enunciation. Here we are in the world, right?
Yes. We are here, you know? But you know, I made this last piece. I mean, you know, I haven't seen a lot of these things in a really long time. So it's reminding me of some of the work and how I've tried to treat some of the work. This little my dirt floor fashion show came at the very end of an extraordinarily tough week of filming. We were making a piece called Constructing History. And Constructing History is a series of reenactments of political assassinations that had taken place in the United States. And those are all my students, actually, who are participating in this little show. And we were restaging these moments: the assassination of John Kennedy, the assassination of Martin, the assassination of Malcolm, the assassination of Medgar, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, etc. Right? And so we were just in this, had been at a very deep place and of looking at really the history of the United States and really overwhelmed that in this great democracy that the vast majority of our deep political leaders had actually been murdered, politically murdered in the United States, which I think is really sort of a real testament of what America really is and the conflicts that really exist in the country. And then how to think about, really, again, the role of women, the role of desire, of play. There's this really wonderful saying that within play, within seriousness, there's little room for play, but within play, there's tremendous room for seriousness. And so this play is very serious about looking at women in a very particular kind of way, and also around fun, because sometimes you just need to do that.
There is something also that remember, for those of you who haven't visited the show, know that there are 3 of the pieces of constructing history in MAFRE that also accompany a series of pinks and blues. All of a sudden I have like, I think, like English, Catalan, what I'm saying. Which are very, to me, back to the idea of appropriation that is so critical in your practice, both sound and image, in the way that they bring together, or even the sense of reenactment, no, as an act of almost taking ownership of our role in history making, right? Which I think is also very important, but also in a way that the reappropriation of certain imagery, almost, it seems to me that it also appeals to the very sense of you taking ownership of some kind of history that, again, left very little room for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's, again, talking about those sort of rivers and streams and ways of dodging the bullet. You know, they say that, usually the first person through the door is the one that's, fairly bruised. So I've been, kind of kicked around a bit. But still managing to really get the work done. And I think it is really, my fascination with political history, social history, cultural history is long. And trying to understand my role in relationship to appropriation, trying to understand my role and my relationship to historical events, and how those events have such incredible weight on the present is really important to me. And in this context, when I was working with a group of students, I thought it was really important to also bring them into a more active engagement by really trying to put themselves in the shoe of the other, to feel what that experience may have been like, right? Even though they were, 20 years old, or it's been a fairly persistent part of the work, I think, Vera, to regardless of, again, breaking out of the defined space and the confined space that was meant for me, and trying to figure out ways around it in order to tell, again, these sort of stories that need to be told in a way that can be understood, reimagined, and embraced.
I feel the same way, Sally, around the capacity. No, you were talking earlier about your work as this I don't know how to say, like this introspective intervention into everything that makes who you are, and everything that somehow is incapable to name you. Again, no, enunciation as a way that it can also offer ambivalence, right? Like that doesn't necessarily need to be certain. You can announce yourself in all those different ways that you see yourself, right? We have seen so many of you in these works, so many moments of that traumatic experience, so many resolutions or aesthetic decisions around how the trauma goes away, or how you hook it, to push it through.
Well, yes. It was connecting with me when you were saying this, that there is a process of deconstruction that when you get to it, what it's telling you basically constantly is what it is that I am constructing, right? And as you were talking about constructing history, I was also thinking about actually constructing life, in the sense that many of your images that I've seen, mostly in photography, take people and they give them a different role that they had seen themselves before that, right? And so some of the models, or there are some pictures of girls, young girls who are seeing themselves portrayed in a different way. And I think that is the power of these fictions that we're creating. No, we have this capacity in the brain that for me is amazing, is that I can watch a film and have a true emotional experience of that film, and my brain knows it's fiction at the same time. But it's giving me the chance to experience what I'm seeing with the full physical, emotional, and everything, memory even. And then we have those memories mixing with reality and everything, right, for the rest of our lives, because of what we're constructing in that moment. So I feel a lot for the role of fiction in that creation, in that in not only representing, it has its function, of course, only representing what is, or we could interpret is, also going back to reconstruct what was said it was, but actually could be seen from a different point of view, it could be told better. And then also, what is it that I'm constructing that I maybe could try for people to see it before they can embody it. I can see it, I can feel it, and then I'm like, I can feel it because my brain allows me to feel it as real, and then I can take it away from the room wherever I saw it and actually try to test that in my life and give me a chance to maybe experiment that as part of the possibility. So it's creating possibility. For me, that's a little bit what it is.
That's right. And somebody just said to me, you can't be what you can't see.
But you didn't saw it and you did it. But you didn't saw it and you did it.
I don't think that's true. I think that I saw many, many things that have influenced me, that have given me, I think that you have to take permission. You have to take permission. That you have to become the author, right, of your possibility. But it is absolutely informed by everything that you see. And then you make all these choices about how you then are going to act in the world.
In a way, what you're saying takes us to this sense of fabulation, of making a history, right? Like the way that you see it, and then you present a narrative or story to the world, the same construction using other facts or ideologies is also in the side of the historian that pretends to present you with a history or a particular moment in history, right? And I think what makes beautiful the reenactment as a choice, the envisioning as a choice, is that you cannot escape it. You are on those shoes. Then the fact that this is experienced as if something that, like in Requiem to Mar the Moment, no, constructing history, or even in that study room, there is this sense of the implicit violence that was necessary for certain power to arise, the violence as a condition of possibility of something. And you have been saying from the beginning, Carrie, no, that there is something about, no, trauma is a condition of possibility of your practice, beauty is the condition of possibility of your practice, passion is the condition of possibility of your practice. No? So I feel like there is something about what one's built, how one's necessarily creates history, no? How you were asking before, no? How are we gonna do it? How are we gonna do it here at MACBA, no? Since I'm here, what that implies, no? And I think there is something about the museum, no? The definition of a museum, that it seems that will not allow me to make a fable out of it, right? And I think if I do something here, and you are now, you can take me accountable later on, is to take permission also to bring that fable into, because there is no history that doesn't have a fiction in it. So why don't I going to build on the fiction that we all decide we want to build in it? So I feel like there is something about both your practices, both who you are also as human being in this polyedric sense, that in a way is taking from that place to produce.
Right. And there are all these examples and models all around us, right? You know, I used to, very early, I still get up very early. And, about 5:30, sometimes 4:30, to look at stuff, to look at other films, to look at other filmmakers, all kinds of filmmakers, to spend time with other artists. I really value spending time with other artists, whether they are writers or composers or musicians or dancers, or, I've been so influenced by and energized by the work that came before. So in my case, for instance, I was just mad about Zora Neale Hurston. I don't know if most of you in the audience know who she is, but great writer, folklorist, anthropologist, poet, novelist. I remember long ago somebody told me that I reminded them of this woman, Zora Neale Hurston, who I didn't know at the time. And I was just turning about 30, and was in that moment in my life where I was really questioning me. Who am I? And what is the nature of my voice? And how do I express it? And how do I express it photographically, visually? And what is singular about the way I view and see the world? And how do I then construct that in photographs, right? And I am just pulling my hair. And I am in trouble, right? I'm in trouble because I can't figure out the path, right? I'm working every day. I'm pressing hard every day, but I can't figure out the path. So I took a bus ride to San Francisco. I was living in San Diego. It's about, 500 miles away or something. And but between San Diego and San Francisco. And I decided to take the bus back because I didn't want to get home too soon, right? And on the way out of the door, leaving my girlfriend's house, was a book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, sitting on her son's desk. And I asked if I could take it with me. I got on the bus, opened the book, and from the first paragraph was in, right? And read it all the way home, right? Read it the entire journey. And I was so engrossed in it, right? When I got off the bus, right, I still had the book open as I was dragging my suitcase, but like reading this thing simultaneously, right? And I drug it all, my suitcase in. I opened my door. I'm still reading the book. I go into my bedroom. I lay on my bed that was on the floor, and I finished reading this thing. And it changed my life. It changed my life that there was this work who showed me in literature all of my possibility, right? I mean, like all of my possibility, that there was suddenly this voice that said, this is your path, this is your well. And if you can drink from this, right? From your home, from your space, then actually something is possible for you, Carrie. It was just like an amazing, amazing thing. And I actually went on to study folklore. I graduated in the arts, and then I went on to UC Berkeley to study folklore. So enamored I was by that writing, or by the writing of Toni Morrison and Alice Walker, who talked about what it was like to be an artist in our grandmother's time. Right? A story that must be cruel enough to curl the blood is what she said, right? And so I'm using then literature as my way. They became my role models. I knew all the boys. And I admired them, from Frank to Wintergrand and, Cartier-Bresson, all of the famous photographers. I studied it, I knew, and I admired deeply. But suddenly there was something for me in this in-between space that writers had discussed and dancers had imagined, but I hadn't seen yet in photographs in the way that I needed to see them. And out of that really came the Kitchen Table series.
We're going to go to see Ode to My Father, which is the last movie of today, because we hope that there's going to be time for conversation. So we decided to cut short some of the video because Carrie wanted to talk to you as well. So let's go with that, and then we will see you guys in a minute.
It occurred to me watching this, watching these this evening that, for the most part, I only work with my friends. I construct these weird psychedelic little environments. These little studios, these little. I usually have like 2 nickels to rub together, and a cheap camera, and decide to invite my friends to explore with me for a few days, and my father had just passed away actually, and I decided that I was coming up for air, and I needed to surround myself with a group of friends and colleagues, and invited them all to join me in this wonderful warehouse, and I just kind of make things as we go along. I wasn't sure exactly what we were going to do, but I wanted to have like a dance for my father.
I think there is also something that needs to be said about that sense of gathering. No, we have been talking about condition of possibilities, and in your case, convening, gathering together, being together is also a strategy for, or a poetic, or ways of doing, in a way, for the word to emerge.
Yeah, I'm actually really selfish, and for the most part, I really love being by myself. And I take great joy in being alone, but I do have an extraordinary group of friends and artists and musicians and dancers who I've been working with for years in various ways, and so they work with me on my performances and in my performances. And many of them work with me with the convenings that I do. I've done major convenings. Sometimes they last for 5 days, sometimes for 3 days, sometimes just for a few hours. But I've been doing them and programming them and designing them for a very, very long time. And usually there's there are several central questions that I'm really engaged in at the moment. And I invite then my friends to really speak to that in their particular way, based on the work that they are themselves doing. And it is really hard in some ways, but extraordinarily fulfilling, that I'm able also to sort of provide a really wonderful platform to share around a set of ideas with people who feel as passionately and as strongly as I do about the times in which we live.
We're going to open the conversation for the public. I don't know if you have questions, comments, performance. We accept everything. One thing that I had to say, like in relation to this, and I jump here so then you get your mindset together, but also we can hear unorganized questions. That's also okay. But one of the things that you were very modest, no? Talking about your friends, because of course your friends are incredible. No, you talk about the world of literature. You connect with activists, with musicians, and the sound and your voice, first sound of all that we get. The music, no? That somehow the history of the States that is also one that one can tell through music. No? And I wonder if you can talk a little bit while the audience is gathering their bravery and their thoughts together to ask you tons of questions that I know people have, in their pocket.
Questions, that's it.
That if we could talk about a little bit about sound and then this music. Your voice.
I don't know. It's just, music is just so, it's just the first thing. It's just the first thing. It's the first love. And I really, I've told Avira this before, I start every day, almost every day, listening to music. And I listen to the same music. I listen to lots of music, but I start my day every day with Ode to Life, and then that's followed by Stevie Wonder's Love and Needs of Love Today, and it just and then there are all these songs about love. Right? I spend my morning doing that. My first 45 minutes to an hour is really filled with these very particular sounds by really accomplished, extraordinary musicians. Right now, actually, I'm working on a piece with Yo-Yo Ma, which I'm really excited about. We're doing a piece around the Constitution, around notions of truth and trust. And using the Constitution as a source of that.
Questions?
Or, and you're welcome to make comments too.
Exactly.
Right?
Comments, question, performance.
Yeah, and if there are cocktails, we could just go have cocktails.
Yeah, we didn't prepare it, but we can improvise. There's somebody here.
Hola. Hi. Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that you're here. I've been following your work for many years, and I'm a true admirer of your photographs. And I didn't know you were also a filmmaker, so now my head exploded today when I saw these things. I also wanted to, before I get into the comments and question, also thank Elvira, because I think this thing that you put together for all of us to see is incredible, and I hope you do many more things like this, because I'm really happy that you're here.
Thank you.
And well, I heard so many things that you talked about humanity and love, and also the trauma and the suffering and trying to how to create all these things. And so many things came to my mind, but I wanted to, you mentioned something after the first two films, the first two short films, that was about not going to the classical approach of documentary photography, because you needed people to look at the camera. And it reminded me of this film Sans Soleil by Chris Marker, yes. And where he's looking at the women of Pissot and saying that is there anything dumber than what they teach you in film schools of not looking at the camera, because that look is incredible, yes. Fascinating. Yes. And so thinking about that and the connections that I see with his work and editing, because you also mentioned editing. I have seen your photographs, I have seen now your films, and I see a lot of words and literature and music, and so many of the things that work in some kind of juxtaposition all the time. And even the fashion show with Angela Davis in the background,
That's right. That's
and her natural, like she used to say, and all those juxtapositions, they fascinate me. And I don't know if you would like to talk a little bit about your use of the language, and in the language in the more open sense, not just the written language, but the language, the visual language, the sound, and all of that, and this connection with the juxtaposition, and maybe what I think is kind of a dialectical discourse that you construct.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. You know, I'm always saying that I'm not a politician. I really am an artist, and I'm really butting up against. All of the work is butting up against another kind of reality, right? It's pushing against a reality in a world that has been historically denied me a certain kind of access, and people that I care about a certain kind of access. And so I'm always trying to figure out a way that allows for the image to speak, for the image to carry its language, for the voice to carry its language, and for the sound to carry its language. And they are all very, very, very different, and they're all butting up against one another. And my strategy is to figure out how to weave them together in a way that it forces me and the audience, by extension, to ask a certain set of questions about what they've just seen, what they've just heard, and now what they might imagine. This reality, this new reality, and a sort of notion about future to be. Because I think that underlying all the work in some way then is the question of, if this isn't it, then what will the future be? What can the future hold? And so how can the work sort of do that and push that is the thing that I'm really sort of most interested in. But I think that you're right, that they are in juxtaposition, but also in simpatico, that they all come together in order to produce something that is new, and that is hopefully the question that you begin to ask yourself about what it is that you're seeing, and then what it is that you understand, and then how might you act, and how might you act differently. And thank you. What's your name? And are you a filmmaker? Photographer? Here in Barcelona? Ah, lovely to meet you. You do?
Anybody else?
Pequeño. En fotocolectánea. Que yo no me atrevo a. En fotocolectánea, ese vínculo entre la música o la letra de la música, que en la cabeza cuando lo leías, la escuchabas, más tu texto, más la foto, de alguna manera sumaban, y yo sentí exactamente lo que estás diciendo, ¿no? Ese nuevo lugar en el que todo es más, o la obra es más que las partes, ¿no? Y eso me hacía que pudiera sentir que la obra terminaba siendo universal, más universal aún que si no fuese así. Solo eso, que realmente me conmovió mucho, me conmueve mucho tu trabajo siempre. Y creo que tiene que ver con eso, con la universalidad, con hacer que puedas aproximarte a una realidad que estaba velada.
Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if it, hopefully, that the work does bring us closest to ourselves. And so I don't know if I don't know if it's an interesting word, universality, right? I mean, it's an interesting term in and of itself, but I do hope that the work has a way of bringing one closest to themselves, which is why the work is being shared, right? That it does have the capacity, an avenue or a stream that allows us to, again, crawl more closer to who we are. Because I do think that becoming human is a lifelong project. And so what are all of the vehicles that we might be able to use that might allow us to get to that space of resolve and understanding of who we are and what it is that we're doing on this planet, right? I mean, I just think of us as being sort of dust particles, just kind of floating in the universe. And every once in a while, we just brush up and we bump into others. You know, we're just like little cells or little atoms. And it's an enormous thing to be alive. And to be alive at this time, I think, is extraordinary. And what is the responsibility of artists? And then what is the responsibility of each of us? I think that, you know, again, artists have this capacity because we are committed to dealing with the emotional side of ourselves, which is the most complex side of ourselves, that allow us to get closest to ourselves. And so I'm hoping that the work does have larger ramifications. I know one thing, that it's a bit bigger than me, right? It's a lot bigger than me. And I was telling somebody about a conversation that I had with Robert Frank not long ago, or before he died, and where he refused to allow me to use one of his pieces. I used it anyway. But, you know, at a certain point in the conversation, it was, you know, Robert, I think you really need to understand at this point that the work is simply larger than you. It's bigger than you, and it really belongs to us now. You know, and you know, we had a great fight, but he never hung up the phone on me. So I think that he heard me on some level.
Hi, thank you very much for today. I think it's very interesting as well that we got different generations on stage. You've been a teacher yourself, you said before. So I would like to know, what's your message today for youngest generation, for Sally's generation, young maker? If you got something to deliver to all these new filmmaker and artists.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that, you know, we're not showing any of your work tonight. We should have screened at least one piece, but I muscled her out of the way.
That's coming. I have to say I'm very lucky because I did show your work a long time ago, so we will bring it back to MACBA. Yes, a leveling. Yes.
But I love the way you're thinking about ideas and thinking about work. And how long have you been making film?
I've been working in the industry for 15 years now, and I did my first short in 2014. Life had to break my leg for, like, literally for me to be like, okay, I have to make a film. Thank you. But yeah, I'm taking it slower than I did at the beginning. I'm giving myself more time now. But yeah.
Well, you know, it takes a while for a project to come together. It takes really, you know, for it to come together, years. Are you working with a group of young filmmakers? Are there people that you're really interested in of your generation? And how do you think of your generation as compared to my generation, right? I mean, are there issues that you think need to be addressed and they need to be addressed differently?
Definitely. We live in a different time with different perceptions of who we are and how we have to move forward. I think some things are common, and there is a lot of inspiration in other generations, and this is what they did, and I that we take inspiration from and also see sort of a path. But I also see the need of those same references that we use, we need to use them in a different way because we're perceiving ourselves in a different way.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I was actually trying to bring to mind something more concrete, but I feel like, and I'm a bit of a unicorn, I have to say. I define myself as an alien when I meet people because I feel really alone in my practice, I have to say. In the way I think, not alone in my life. My friends, you know, are there, even if they don't understand anything that I'm saying, they still smile and are happy for me. So, but I am somehow pushing things that I don't have a lot of people around me trying to work in the same way or trying to ask the same questions. So my reference will be like, for example, if we look at it from the work in activism, Black activism in concrete. In Europe, we look back a lot to African Americans and the whole work that is done and keeps being done from a very specific context that then we're finding doesn't apply. So you were talking about what happened with George Floyd, and that also came here. It came all over the world, in Europe, still with a frustration that what is happening here in this context doesn't have the impact, not even in this context. It's not that it has to have in the rest of the world. It's that the possibility that it gives people to take a distance to, oh, wow, this is happening in the States, how horrible people they are. So I know, wait a minute, there's a lot going on here. So I can see that frustration and then a need to find a certain language that is not,
It speaks here.
that speaks here and has a different difficulties in the power, because if we think about the United States as creators, everything travels all around the world. We're constantly with our eyes of everything that is coming, call it cinema, call it music, everything. But we don't have the same possibility to use those works in the same powerful way. That is not a terrible thing. What I mean by that is we need to find different ways. So where we're taking inspiration, which for me, I always said it, if I didn't speak English, I don't know what my life will be like. Like the possibility of finding reference somewhere else has saved me. But then I have to really, take that and think deeply, how am I going to do with that without being in that context myself, without that being my context, being a very different one and a very silent one, because Europe is very silent. Like what we're seeing that is represented in many places, I know here, most people will know more about slavery in the States than they know about here. And that is the first barrier to actually try to work with these things. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
It doesn't, but it's a good answer.
Okay.
And I like it. and I think it's really interesting, right? And so then, I'm looking forward to learning much more about the scope of your practice and then what that looks like. Yeah.
No, now that you were, and we will go to the next question, but now that you were talking about this, I was thinking, when you mentioned George Floyd, about the momentum, right, and the capacity for empathy that we all felt at the time, no? And I was thinking one person, and then I thought about Melilla, no, and those who die crossing, trying to cross the border, and how many bodies we had to see, and how horrendous that was, and it had some repercussion, but we were all somewhere else. Right, and the fact, sometimes I feel like, what is it? Of course, let's say, American popular imaginary or the United States popular imaginary is in our life before even we can decide whether we wanted it or not. It developed a language that already captivates the way we think about, no? And then Paul Gilroy, Against Race, is critically talking about, no, this one vision of blackness, which I think is something that you somehow, Carrie, had tried to challenge, no? Like we see such as African series, you are much into that folklore as much as you have extrapolated, let's say, Africa as the great aporia, right? Like something that connects us beyond the American the psique or the American imaginary, right? Like I feel like there is something there, right? I think we are yet, and I see Tanya here, but it might be others, no? Tanya Safura Adams is the person you said that you know from somewhere. Maybe you have
will.
you will know her, but also Sally or other people in the audience. I cannot see from after the second line, so forgive me if there is some renowned artist that I cannot see.
But
Yeah.
the thing that's complicated,
Yeah.
I am here. Right? I'm here. We're looking at and we are speaking English. And I am here. And I think probably in the last few weeks while I've been in Europe, because I haven't been here for a while, I've been very upset by this. Because I'm seeing all of this extraordinary work by young Spanish artists, French artists, English, British artists that never makes it across the water, and realizing how hampered we are, how hampered America is in its vision and its understanding of itself because of its enormous capacity to consume everything. It's heartbreaking, right? I walked into a bookstore today and just saw all these wonderful things, and I thought, why am I not seeing any of this in the United States? And so what seems to be power in some ways has really turned out to be a great weakness. And so that's why it's so critical for you to continue your work, whatever that work is, and to insist and to find unique ways in which to sort of present it. And a part, I think, of the project now is to dissolve some of these borders, at least in our minds, that allow us to be able to work across generation and across distance.
Another questions? Anybody?
It's
There
probably
is
time
one
for us to
person-
go
yeah.
really soon, right? It's getting really
Yes.
late.
Is there anybody else that had a question apart from this beautiful lady at the first row? No? So we'll go with you and then maybe we can come up to a conclusion. Please.
I'm really nervous, but first of all, I really want to thank all of you for being today here, Elvira, Sally, and Carrie, because I admire all of you three. But this is like a really personal thing, but I really want to thank you, Carrie, for all your work, because I was born and I grew up here, and I went to art school here because I decided when I was like 13 that I wanted to try to be an artist. But during those years in art school, I didn't see a single Black or African artist. And then I was really lucky because I was able to move to London and study photography there. And a friend of mine gave me this little book called MoMA Highlights, which I guess it's like a catalog of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And there I saw Ousmane Sembène's Hala, a film. And from here I saw What Happened and I Cried by you. And I think that was the first time that I thought that, you know, sorry. Thank you.
You never know who's looking. You never know what they're going to see. You never know what it's going to do. But I am so happy to know that the work has landed in your heart, and that it's been able to help you shape your life in the way that you might work in the world. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you, and I thank you for the recognition. It means a great deal to me. You know, I really I don't think of myself in this weird way, you know, like my name is used a lot. And it's like used a lot, you know, and I'm asked to do a whole bunch of stuff that I don't want to do. But I never think of myself as well known, and I don't think of myself really as a great artist. Though I do believe what I do is important, and that it has meaning, and that it has a usefulness that is useful for me and for the people that I care about, and I care about a lot of folks. But I'm really happy to know that it's been important in your life, and thanks for sharing that with me. Thank you all for being here. Evira, thank you so much for inviting me into the land that you love, the place that you call home, the place where you're creating new things and new imaginings that will be important for the city, and I think for the world. I think that what you're going to do, I can imagine that what you're going to do is going to have serious ramifications beyond anything that you can wildly imagine. And a part of that is because of who you are and what you bring, and it's going to be different than anything else that anybody else has brought. That you are, again, the first African-American, African woman in this position, I think is of enormous importance. And that's not to say that your vision is, quote, radically different, right? That you don't understand some sense of what has come before and the importance of continuity and history. But it does mean that there is something that's different on the horizon, and that you recognize that, and that any number of museums around the world will be looking to what you do here. And so I salute you on your great accomplishments, and thank you, Sally, for sitting with me tonight. And
Thank
for
you
your
so
words.
much for having me. It's an honor.
What can I say? I will say one thing, that life, first and foremost, is wonderful. It's wonderful that we are here, the three of us, that you give me the opportunity to read your practice in a manner that it brings also knowledge, love, passion, and and serendipity, spontaneous life. This is it. This is what it is, right? Like, I think, like, did you think that you recognize somebody in the audience, and you mention it while you're talking about something that really is deep to your heart. It's part of life, and this is the life we want to bring to this museum. You said something beautiful earlier, that we are in a perpetual, or some sort of, like, I read it this way, no? That we are in a perpetual state of becoming, right? And I think that's also to be said for MACBA. And this is, you know, part of, you know, this year too, but it's also for me year, all the work that we have been doing in the background is going to be coming apparent, you're coming out to the surface as some of the people progressing, no, in your videos, walking. But I want to thank you for the poetry, the love, the friendship, the mentorship. I always say that I had never have a mentor, but I lie. You are one of them. One of the, but that I have as a travel companion, right? You are part of the journey, and that is beautiful. And with this call to our responsibility, the call to our humanity, the call to bring together new models to be connecting us to this. You say something beautiful, and it will be maybe a possibility for the universal to be defined in this way. You said one get close to themselves, right? And that maybe is the sense of the universal. And with that, we thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming. And see you in the next, which I think is next week, opening of Maria Teresa Hincapié. Please go to see the shows, Afre, Fotocoletania, and here, and see you in the exhibition space. There you go. Bye.